What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video and another Joey-Pegasus video. It's been a bit since I've actually done a Joey-Pegasus video, since I've been doing live streams of locals tournaments in the Discord channel. Discord link is in the description below if you want to join in on any of those in the future. But now I'm getting back into my more scheduled video content, and we're going to start off with a Joey-Pegasus video because that's the current format that I'm covering. And also the deck that I'm going to cover today is one that's relatively popular, and it's Hayabusa OTK. But before we dive into the deck itself, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. We're just over 700 subscribers at the time of recording. I'd really like to reach 750 by the end of July, so subscribing will help me do that, and also it will keep you notified whenever new videos or streams come out. But with that out of the way, let's dive in to this Hayabusa deck. So basically the goal of this deck is to use Hayabusa Knight, which can attack twice, to get in for massive amounts of damage, buffing it up with equipped cards like Axe of Despair, Mage Power, and United We Stand. Now, this was a deck in the previous formats as well, like Android, and it was decent there. I think the better equipped strategy was the sort of like Megamorph aggro strategy that was pioneered by Yami Chaotico in one of the tournaments for Android. That deck was pretty sick, and I think that it had some major advantage over the Hayabusa Knight OTK deck. However, I think that deck gets a lot worse in Joey-Pegasus format for Scapegoat, because Scapegoat can provide just 4 tokens that can block your attacks, and of course this can really stymie the Hayabusa OTK deck. But Hayabusa can help you get through those goat tokens, and also with the monsters like Dark Elf and Jiraiya, it's a bit worse because you have to basically spend 4,000 life points to get through your opponent's goat tokens if you're getting through them with just the Dark Elves or Jiraiya. So I do think that Hayabusa Knight plays a little bit better with into Scapegoat. It obviously isn't the best, and Scapegoat can really stop your big OTK pushes, which is a major flaw of the deck, but it can at least play through them a little bit better than the other version of Equip Aggro in this format. In addition, Scapegoat pairs very well with United We Stand, so that can potentially buff up Hayabusa Knight to a point where you can just OTK just with one equip. So I think that that is a very good sort of boost to this deck. But now that I've talked about why I'm covering this over the other Equip Aggro deck, let's get into the card by card. So to start off, we're playing 2 Hayabusa Knights. In the past, I had just one as a searchable option off of Witch and Sangan, but I do think given the amount of draw power in this deck with things like Graceful Charity, I think it's fine playing 2 because the main goal of this deck is to use things like Graceful Charity and Pot to just draw into your combo. So having 2 of these makes it a little bit more consistent. You don't necessarily want to play 3 as this card isn't really the best on its own outside the OTK. We're also playing the core beaters, Bazoo, Gemini Elf, and Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. We're playing these each at 2, which I do think is probably the best ratio for most decks in this format, given things like Graceful Charity can enable you to draw into these more easily. We're also playing a Jinzo to shut off our opponent's traps, which can be very good when going for the OTK. We're playing 3 Mystic Tomato to fetch out the Witch and the Sangan that we're playing deck, which can fetch out the Hayabusa Knights or fetch out our beaters in the case of Witch. And lastly, we're playing a Sinister Serpent, which is just a great discard fodder with something like Charity. I think honestly in the future I might cut this in favor of some other things, although it does help when you're trying to just draw through your deck. You have to discard less overall going for the Gracefuls. But I think maybe in place of the Serpent, I'll substitute it for like a Cannon Soldier in the future, as I did realize in the gameplays that Cannon Soldier can be very good, especially when paired with something like Scapegoat, at just getting it in that last bit of OTK damage. So I do think that probably this will be replaced with Cannon Soldier in the future if I ever revisit the deck. For these spells, we're playing 2 Axe of Despair, 1 Mage Power, 1 United We Stand for our equip package here. I do think the United We Stand is now worth covering. Previously, I didn't because, I felt like it was too inconsistent, and Axe of Despair is just, in general, the better buff. But here, with the existence of Scapegoats, I do think that the United We Stands are worth it. For the other spells, they're mainly just the power spells of the format. We've got a Change of Heart, a Confiscation, a Darkhold, a Liquid Duo, 2 Graceful Charity, Harpy's Feather Duster, Heavy Storm, 2 Mystical Space Typhoon, Monster Reborn, Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, 2 Scapegoat, a Snatch Steal, and a Forceful Sentry. I do want to highlight the spell and trap removal ratios here. Instead of playing 3 MST and a Harpies, we're playing Harpies Heavy and 2 MST. The reason for this is that we can blow out our opponent's back row and go in for a big OTK push. And also, on the topic of the Scapegoats, we're just playing 2 of these as, 3 is fine, but like the deck kind of has tight spacing issues. So we don't really have the room to play 3, although you could definitely do that if you want to. For the traps, we've got a Call of the Haunted, Imperial Order, and a Mirror Force. These are the sort of staple traps of the format that every deck should be playing, and so we are playing them as well. You could potentially add some Jars of Greed here to draw deeper into your combo, but you know, what are you going to cut for that? There's a lot of very good cards in this deck, and again, spacing is a bit tight here, so it's something that you could potentially add in the future if you want to go that direction, but I think I'm fine with it as is. For the side deck, we've got a Bazoo the Soul Eater and a Kaiku in case we need to bring these in for some matches. We've got 2 Noblemen of Crossout and a Ceasefire in case we're up against a more flip-focused strategy. Although Ceasefire might be good to include in the main just for cases where you want to deal that last bit of damage after an OTK push. We've also got a Mystical Space Typhoon and a Dust Tornado to deal with more back row heavy decks. We've got a Fairy Meteor Crush here, and this is to deal with decks that after siding might bring in like a Scapegoat to stop your OTK push. Fairy Meteor Crush can help you push through that. I'm not really sure if it's worth maining or not, as it is kind of an iffy card, I think, because some decks aren't playing Scapegoat. I think that Scapegoat is a staple, but you know, some decks are like, we don't really need the Scapegoat. We can fill it with other good stuff cards instead. So I think that Fairy Meteor Crush on the side is honestly fine, but you can potentially bring this into the main as well. We've got 2 Solemn Wishes against Burn, and lastly, we've got 3 Torrential Tribute, 2 Trap Hole. In case we're up against a more aggro deck, these can be good to wipe away their board and open up the way for a Hayabusa OTK. The Fusion deck here is, you know, we're never going to go into this, but we just have it at 15 just to bluff our opponent a little bit. But now with that deck breakdown out of the way, let's dive into some games and see how this deck actually plays, and if it's able to actually pull off its combo. Okay, we've got some games against Colgate, who has been a frequent guest on the channel. Not necessarily in Android format, but previously. So always exciting to have them on the channel and have them back on the channel. So we are going to dive into the gameplay here. We're aiming to go first, but unfortunately, we do lose the rock, paper, scissors, and so we'll be going second. The deck, you know, can potentially win second turn. It's unlikely though. So you want to go first to get that extra draw. And our opponent's just going to start out with a T-set and pass. And honestly, this is a decent hand. We can just set this Tomato. And we'll actually set this Heavy Storm here instead of setting the Imperial Order. And this may seem weird, because you may think, well, why not have the Imperial Order on field to shut down if our opponent has like a Nobleman of Crossout or some other powerful spell to deal with our set. The reason for this is, you know, if our opponent does just have an MST set here, they could potentially blind snipe our back row in the end phase here. We could potentially set the Heavy and the Imperial Order to deal with that. But, you know, again, they could blind snipe the Imperial Order, and that wouldn't necessarily be the best. So I feel like this is the safer play to do, and luckily we do get that read right. We do lose our Heavy here, but it looks like our opponent doesn't really have much back row either way. But they're just going to go for a Summoned Skull here. Very interesting. This saw some play in the recent Treasure Locals that I streamed the other day. So maybe seeing more of a rise in other formats as well. They're going to hit over our Mystic Tomato with the Summoned Skull. So we're going to bring out actually this Witch of the Black Forest. Maybe we should have brought out another Tomato instead to help with deck thinning a little bit. But I think this is ultimately fine. Harpy's Feather Duster is okay, but not necessarily the best. We're just going to set the Serpent here, set the Imperial Order, and pass back to them. And let's see what they do here. They're going to bring out a Change of Heart. Change of Hearting our set. It's Sinister Serpent, so honestly that's fine by us. And our opponent's just going to attack into this Witch here. We'll lose the Witch, but we can get out a Bazoo to deal with that Summoned Skull, which I guess is why we search out the Witch instead of getting another Tomato here. We're going to take 300 from that Serpent. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Sandgame, which is pretty nice. We're just going to go for the Bazoo here, just trying to either eat up some back row or, you know, just clear that skull. And we're going to switch the Sinister Serpent defense to play around Mirror Force, but luckily that will indeed crash with the skull. So we'll pass back to our opponent. They're going to flip up this Witch of the Black Forest here. And they're going to think about this in main phase 1, and they're actually going to bring out a Giant Germ as well. So Giant Germ implies that they might be on a Necrofear deck, which makes sense with the Summoned Skull being a fiend. So, yeah, this might be a Necrofear, and this generally wouldn't be that much of an issue if it was just Necrofear. But some Necrofear decks do play a card that will be a problem for us if it actually is in the deck here. So let's hope that our opponent isn't playing that, but we may find out what that card is over the course of this game. So our opponent's going to attack into our Sandgame. We'll search out another Tomato here. They're going to hit in for 1,000 with the Germ. And with that Germ on field, there actually is potentially an OTK line we can do with the Hayabusa Knight, because Germ will special summon out other copies of itself in attack. So if we can get 10,000 damage on board with the Hayabusa, then we can potentially go for an OTK push here. However, as it stands, I don't think we have that capability quite yet, especially given that we don't know what their back row is, and that could be really bad for our Hayabusa here. I feel like we can have the read that's not Mirror Force, or else we would have Mirror Forced on our Bazoo. So we could potentially just go for it, bring out Hayabusa Knight, boosting it up to 2,000 with Mage Power and all our set spells and traps on field, and then giving it an additional 800 with United We Stand, but that only bring it up to 3,800, which wouldn't quite be enough to kill our opponent here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm still going to bide my time a bit, set this Mystic Tomato, add another monster on field for the United We Stand, and I think that'll be pretty good. Our opponent's going to attack into it with a Witch, and they won't be able to clear that. We draw Kaiku, though, which honestly is pretty decent. We could go for the Kaiku here and just try and banish some cards from grave if they are on Necrofear. I think this is a pretty good option here. So we're just going to attack into the Witch. They do have a Karibo, and Karibo is the problematic card for our deck, because, you know, we can play around things on field that might disrupt our OTK, but having a monster in hand to disrupt it is really rough. And that's going to be something that sort of looms over us for the rest of the game here. Opponent is going to go for a Snatch Steal, and now we will fire the Imperial Order. You know, them Change of Hearting a Sinister Serpent was fine. Snatch Stealing that tomato might be a bit less fine. So they're going to think about exactly what to do here. Now that that's been stopped a bit, and they're going to go for a banish here, but they can't actually do this because Kaiku is on field. That does give us knowledge that the Dark Necrofear is in hand, so you know that's fine. And we got to think a bit here, because again, we could potentially have a lethal line given our cards here. If we can bring out the Hayabusa Knight and go for a big push here. Now, in order to do that, we need to let the Imperial Order lapse, which will give them back the tomato. But if we attack over the tomato with the Kaiku, and then attack into their Germ with something else, then we could potentially go for a lethal line. And again, this is why I'm sort of regretting not putting Cannon Soldier in the deck, because if we had Cannon Soldier in the deck, I mean, I guess if we had Cannon Soldier in the deck, it would be in Sinister Serpent's spot, and thus we wouldn't be able to bring it out with the tomato. But if we had had it in the deck in a different slot, then we could potentially have attacked into the tomato, brought out a Cannon Soldier to boost up the Hayabusa Knight with the United We Stand and get in for a ton of damage, then tribute off our board to deal that last bit. As is, I think now if we let the Imperial Order lapse and just leave their mysterious back row be, we can get Hayabusa Knight boosted up by 2,000 with Mage Power, and then an additional 2,400 with United We Stand, which will give it 5,400 attack total. Yep, 5,400 attack total, which attacking into two face-up giant germs in attack will be lethal damage as long as they don't have Karibos. However, I don't think I'm going to go for this play, because it is risky into Karibos. And also, you know, we'd have to leave up their mysterious back row here, which could potentially be like a Mystical Space Typhoon, which would just disrupt our play here even more. So I think we are going to go for letting the Imperial Order lapse here. We are going to fire this Harpy's Feather Duster just to clear away that back row, whatever it is. But unfortunately, they have a Call of the Haunted. We could Mystical Space Typhoon that Call of the Haunted from our hand, prevent them from getting the Sangan back. But that would really deplete our Hayabusa Knight's power here. So I figure, okay, you know, we're going to go for this Harpy Feather, let them search here, and maybe we'll delay our Hayabusa Knight OTK push for the next turn, because I feel like, you know, we've got Kaiku on field. They'll want to probably use the Karibo on the Kaiku. So, you know, we can let it use, we can let it be used for that. And we get back the tomato here. So we will be able to get a potential Kaiku swing. We can also bring out Serpent and attack to attack over the Giant Germ and just get in for a lot of damage that way. I think honestly that might have been the best play. However, we are running a bit low on life points here, so it might not be the best play to do that. But either way, we'll get them to use up their Karibo on this Kaiku. We will take 500 from the Germ here. And main two, we're just going to set into Mystical Space Typhoon and pass back to our opponent. I think I made a misplay. I should have set the Serpent here. But honestly, I just forgot to do so. Which may come back to bite me later. But I really should have just brought out the Serpent to wall up a little bit more, just in case they had a way to get over my tomato or Kaiku here. as is, they're going to fire a Forceful Sentry and send back that Hayabusa. So now they do have hand knowledge. So they do know we're on the Hayabusa OTK. If this was a really competitive game, I might have honestly just scooped it up at the Forceful to prevent them from knowing that we were on the Hayabusa deck. So that way they couldn't side against it in game 2. Because we are very likely to lose here, given that they've got Karibo in hand that we need to... Or actually, they used up Karibo. But, you know, if they've got another Karibo to search out, then, you know, it's a bit difficult to eat through here. But, you know, there is a chance that we still do win here. That Magician of Faith getting back a Forceful Sentry makes it a bit less likely of a chance. But, you know, there still is a chance. They're going to go for the Jinzo here, shuffle that back. And they've got a Dark Hole, so it wouldn't have mattered if we had set our Serpent or not, I guess. They're going to banish 3, go for the Necrofear here. And they're going to attack in for 2,200. And that's pretty rough for us. They're going to pass back to us. We draw Raigeki, so that we'll be able to deal with it. I could potentially set the Sinister Serpent here, wall up a little bit. But they could just go for lethal, potentially. If they've got, like, a Reborn or anything to bring back this Summon Skull, then that would be pretty bad for us. So we're just going to fire this Raigeki here, set the Sinister Serpent, pass back to them. And they're going to go for a painful choice here. And this will be a painful choice indeed. They're going to send 5 pretty good ones. We don't want to get them the Magician of Faith, given all the powerful spells in Grave. We don't necessarily want to give them the Duo, as that depletes our entire hand here. Confiscation, a similar reason we don't necessarily want to lose our equips. So I think the choices are either the Harpy's Feather Duster or the Imperial Order here. And I think of the two, we've got the Mystical Space Typhoon on field. So we might want to go for the Mystical Space Typhoon, like just hitting the order. It's very risky. If they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon of their own to hit our set, then we get majorly outplayed here because this deck really can't play through Imperial Order. But I think it might be worth doing. They're on pretty low monsters as well. So even if they do clear the Mystical Space Typhoon, it might be fine. We might draw into monsters of our own, as we haven't really used up too many. So I don't know. I feel like the Imperial Order might be the way to go. Harpy's Feather Duster also trades 1-for-1 with this Mystical Space Typhoon. So, you know, maybe we should give them that instead. But if they hold it for when we go for a big push and then they sort of like just use it on that, then we don't really have a recourse against it. So I feel like we are just going to give them the Imperial Order here. Although we'd spend a lot of time thinking about this. But I just give them the Imperial Order. Maybe that was a mistake, but we'll have to find out. They're going to go for a Premature Burial here, and here I'm kind of kicking myself. I mean, they would have been able to pull off this Premature Burial either way, because they likely would have fired the Harpy's Feather Duster, cleared our back row, and then prevented us from sniping this with the Mystical Space Typhoon. But here, as is, I feel like we might have to use this up, because they're going to pre-mat targeting the Sangan Engrave, and that will let them tribute out the Summon Skull that we know they have in hand. And while that won't be the end of the game, we don't necessarily have any way to deal with a Summon Skull on field. I guess we could bring out this United We Stand and pair it with a Mage Power, but that wouldn't quite be enough to get our Sinister Serpent over a Summon Skull. So, I feel like I actually do have to hit this with Mystical Space Typhoon, even if that does leave the Imperial Order up online. Because also, you know, as I said, they've gone through a lot of monsters, and we have not gone through many monsters. We've gone through a couple, to be fair. But I feel like we've got enough left in deck that we can potentially just play through an Imperial Order. And, you know, we've got the perfect bait for Imperial Order here off this Pot of Greed. So they're going to fire that Imperial Order, hitting the Pot of Greed, and now they're burning themselves by 700 each turn. So they can't actually, you know, mount a big offensive here. That I'm feeling pretty good about this. We could potentially flip up the Sinister Serpent and attack in, but we're at low enough life points already that I don't necessarily want to do that. So we're just going to bide our time with this order up. They're going to set one, pass back to us. Painful choice is not the best here, given that they've got order. We can set that as a bluff, potentially. They're going to pay another 7, set one, pass back to us. And we draw Gemini Elf, so we're just going to bring that out. And that's fine by them. We're going to hit into their set. They've got Mirror Force, unfortunately, so we will lose the Elf. But they'll have to pay another 700 for the Imperial Order. They're going to bring out this Wall of Illusion, which is a bit scary, as this means that next turn they likely can go for a lethal push. They'll hit over our Serpent, and we draw Dark Hole, which would have been great if not for that Imperial Order. We're going to set this Sinister Serpent, pass back to our opponent. They will indeed pay for the order again. They'll bring out another Wall of Illusion instead of going for a lethal line, so it seems like they're afraid of something like a Mirror Force here, which honestly, I'll play into that. they are just going to pass back to us. We've got a Sinister Serpent here. Scapegoat will not quite do what we want, unfortunately. We'll set the Scapegoat, set this Serpent, and they're going to set one pass back to us. We draw into Mirror Force, which is very good, but unfortunately they've got a Ceasefire, and that will indeed end the game here, because just on board, they've got 1,500 damage. So that will be the end of the game. Very unfortunate. You know, I think maybe if we had given the Harpy's Feather Duster instead of the Imperial Order, we could have actually potentially won that game. Although it's very tough to say if they had, like, you know, Summon Skull out on field. That would have been very bad for us. So, you know, who's to say how the game would have gone? But it might have gone a little bit better for us. But nothing we can do about that. We just got to go into game 2. And, you know, we could potentially side out of the Hayabusa stuff, given that they know we're on it. And Karibos really do hurt the deck a lot. But, you know, this is the Hayabusa OTK video. We've got to show off that Hayabusa OTK at least once, or at least attempt to. So we are going to go into game 2, keeping the deck largely the same. I think I do bring in some Nobleman's Crossouts, because I feel like that's very good against things like Giant Germ, or Sangan or Witch or things. So I feel like that's pretty good. And I also do add another Kaiku here. We're going to go for a Painful right away. And we send a Comfy, Forceful Duo, Scapegoat, and a Sangan here. The reason we send the Sangan is because we've got the Call of the Haunted in hand to bring that back in case our opponent uses spell and trap removal on it. And it's very likely they're going to give us the Scapegoat here, but I'm not too upset about that because Scapegoat's a pretty good card. They're probably not going to give us the hand rips, but we still want to get them out of the deck because they're a lot less good later on. So they're going to think about exactly what to give us here, and they're going to give us the Scapegoat, which I think makes a lot of sense. Probably the best pick for them. Then we're going to fire at this Graceful Charity. And, oh, as a note, I did side out the Sinister Serpent to make room for the Nobleman's Crossouts and stuff. Because, again, Sinister Serpent isn't, like, the best card for this strategy. It's fine for the Gracefuls. And it would have been very helpful here. But, you know, it is what it is. We don't have Serpents in deck, so we might as well fire this Graceful now. And we're going to think a bit about what to send, but we'll send a Bazoo and a Kaiku here. Maybe a bit of a mistake, but I think it's ultimately fine. We've got the Call of the Haunted, potentially bring back those cards if we need them, and we do have the Kaiku in hand as well. So we're going to set our Tomato here. They've got a Nobleman for the Tomato, which is very unfortunate. They're going to bring out a Giant Germ, tag in for 1,000. We'll let that go through because, you know, we want to save the Call of the Haunted for later, potentially. And if they've got Mystical Space Typhoon, we don't want to be the one to activate the Call of the Haunted first. We're going to bring in this Tomato. We could have potentially brought out a Hayabusa Knight and gone for a lot of damage. I think this is probably the safer option here. And we're dealing in some preliminary damage, so that way our opponent will be lower, so that way we can get a more easy Hayabusa Knight OTK. Opponent's going to bring out 2 Germs, and, you know, we could set the Scapegoat here, because, you know, that's a defensive option if they're able to clear the Tomato. But I feel like Call of the Haunted is also a defensive option in case they clear the Tomato, and having both Call and Scapegoat plays really badly into Harpy's Feather Duster or Heavy Storm. So I feel fine just keeping the Scapegoat in hand for now. Our opponent's going to go for a Graceful Charity here, drawing 3. And then discarding a Ceasefire and a Necrofear. Very interesting. They're going to go for a Mystical Space Typhoon, so this is why I'm glad we saved the Call of the Haunted here. So we'll bring back a Sangan, that'll get popped, and we'll search out a Witch. So we're getting some value off that. Unfortunately, our opponent has a Snatch Seal to take this Tomato, and they're going to get in for a ton of damage here. So kind of unfortunate, made me wish that we had the Scapegoat here set as well. But unfortunately, we did not. So we're going to think about exactly what to do here. We're actually just going to set this Witch and set a Scapegoat and pass back to our opponent. We don't quite have the OTK online yet, and attacking into both the Germs is very, very risky, as we're now at 2,000 life points. So I feel fine doing this instead. They're going to go for a Raigeki on the Witch, which is a bit unfortunate, as, you know, we lose the Witch, but luckily we do have the Scapegoat set. And our opponent is just going to attack in for 2,500 with the Summon Skull. And we do have the Scapegoat, but unfortunately our opponent does have this Imperial Order, and we can't play through that. So that will be the end of the game. Now again, I think maybe just in game 1 we could have actually won this if we had not given them the Imperial Order off the painful choice. But I think it was a fine play given what we knew. It really backfired for us in the end there. And I think game 2, you know, it was kind of an uphill battle. Maybe if we had set the Scapegoat earlier and not taken that amount of damage, we would have been fine. But, I mean, they would have had the order here, and it would have been bad. So I feel like we probably weren't winning this game too either way. But, that can happen in these Hayabusa Knight OTK decks. Of course, I didn't want to end things here, as that is kind of a sad showing for the deck. So I do have another match with this deck, and hopefully we can do a bit better there. Okay, we've got a game against History of YGO1, who's a frequent guest on the channel, and it's done some own work on Hayabusa Knight OTK in this format as well. So exciting to have them on the channel playing. Well, you'll see what they're playing, but we're playing the Hayabusa Knight OTK deck again. We did lose the rock paper scissors there, unfortunately, but it looks like they're just going to start out with a T-set and pass, and that is fine by us. We'll just copy them, going for a T-set and pass of our own. They're going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon, and we've got a Scapegoat here, so actually we're just going to activate it. We haven't normal summoned this turn, we've just set, and at this point in the game's history, you can activate quick play spells the turn you set them. So that's a very good thing to know about in this format. Opponent's going to go for a Graceful Charity, drawing 3 and pitching 2, and they're going to pitch an Axe and our Giant Rat, which signals that they may indeed be on a Hayabusa OTK strategy as well. So, this match likely won't actually be that good in determining Hayabusa Knight's OTK status in the metagame itself, but it will be sort of an interesting test of, like, seeing the strengths and weaknesses of the deck in some way, which you might see as the game goes on. We're going to fire a Raigeki just to clear their board, and we hit a Momonga and a Rat, which honestly is very good for us. We're going to bring out a Witch, and I think I misordered this. We should flip up the Sangan first, because then if they've got a Torrential Tribute, they might want to fire it on the Sangan flip first instead of the Witch summon. So yeah, I misordered that slightly. It looks like they didn't have a Torrential here, so it works out either way. But we're going to attack in for 2100 and pass back to them. Our opponent is going to just set one, pass back to us, and we draw Sinister Serpent, which is pretty good. We're going to attack into their set. We don't need to commit more to board, and actually we can't even commit more to board since we're locked. Our opponent's got a Cyber Draw, so that will clear our board away. So we'll be able to get out some pretty good searches here. And our opponent's going to get out a Momonga and a Hayabusa. Now, I do think I misplay here slightly. I bring out all their monsters in attack after they bring out their monsters in defense. And the reason I do this is just to try and eat through all their monsters, because they've still got a Momonga left in deck, most likely. So by doing this, we'll be able to get in for 3 attacks, which will completely wipe out their field. But I think I probably just should have set one of these tomatoes to play around Mirror Force a bit, in case they did indeed have it. But we'll have to see if that actually comes up. But as is, we're just going to go to attack in after they shuffle up their sets. And let's see if we get punished for our bit greedy play here. They do have the Mirror Force, which, does punish us a bit. And we also do get to search from our Witch and Sangan as well. So they point that out, which is very nice. And so we'll just search out a high, I forget exactly what did we just search. I have no object permanence. So yeah, we had searched out Hayabusa and Kaiku. So we're going to add those, which I do think are pretty good searches here. We don't have the OTK yet, but having the Hayabusa in hand both bluffs that we do have the OTK and also potentially helps us out if we do draw into quips. So, yep, we're going to go for this Pot of Greed. Imperial Order is a great draw here. And we're just going to bring out this Bazoo in main 2, just to have a big monster on board. We'll banish 3 to buff it up to 25, make it a bit harder to get over. And then we're going to set this Imperial Order and a Mystical Space Typhoon and pass back to our opponent. They're going to go for a Graceful Charity. We've got the order for that, so I feel very good about that. As, Hayabusa decks can't really play through order well. We're going to pay 700 for the order, bring out a Hayabusa Knight of our own, and just hit into their sets. That double attack on the Hayabusa can be very nice at just, clearing your opponent's monsters. So we feel good about that. They're going to bring out a Momonga here, but again, we can hit into all of this. Our Bazoo is not actually at 2,500, so good point to know. I just left the counters on by accident. So I think, that previous turn, maybe we should have buffed it up to 2,500 just to, protect it against a Kaiku. Or maybe just buffed it up to 1,900 to protect it against a Kaiku. But I didn't think of it, and it didn't end up mattering here. So this is ultimately fine. We might as well just keep getting aggressive here. If they've got Torrential Tribute, that's obviously bad. But, I mean, it looks like they don't. So we're just going to go for it. We're going to attack in with the Kaiku. Double attack in with the Hayabusa here, and then get in for 2,500 off the Bazoo. So, I mean, I feel like we're in a very, very good spot here. They've got one turn to actually, find a way to deal with this board, and it looks like they did not. So let's see what they had in hand here. They had some pretty good cards. I mean, Yeah, they just kind of drew all spells though, and against order, that's not really gonna do it for them. Yeah, this would have been a pretty good hand for, when they had the Hayabusa up, but the MST would have disrupted it quite a bit. So, they might not have had lethal damage there, although they likely would have had a much better option of lethal if we didn't have the Imperial Order here. But that's sometimes how these games go. And one of the big flaws of Hayabusa is that it just majorly dies to Imperial Order. Like, Imperial Order shuts down the deck entirely. So, I think maybe that's a sign in the future maybe to go for 3 MST and just 1 Harpy's Feather Duster in the main, because you really do need the out to order. But it is a major flaw of the deck that is good to know about. So, I mean, you saw it in match 1 as well, but it really did rear its ugly head here in the mirror match as well. So, we are going to be going second here as our opponent did lose the first game. They're going to go for a Graceful, discard a Jinzo and Axe. Going to go for a pot as well. Sometimes when you get out, and there's another Graceful. Sometimes, when you got it, you got it. And so I feel like we're likely not going to win this game, as, generally if your opponent is able to Graceful pot in the first turn, it's a really bad sign for you. We're going to go for a Harpy's Feather Duster here first. I think, honestly, we could have just gone for the Pot of Greed first. But, I mean, Harpy's does clear the board, so it's fine. We had the MST in case our opponent had an IO. We're going to go for a pot here and just bring out a tomato attack in. The reason we're doing this is if it's a rat, they don't get to search this way. And also if it's something like a Sangan or a Witch, we've got the Forceful for main phase 2. It's a not a Hayabusa, it's a Momonga instead. So our opponent is going to bring out 2 more Momongas. And then main 2, we're going to fire this Forceful, see what they got in hand. And honestly, this is not the best hand. So I feel pretty good about this because, after Graceful Pot, generally your opponent's got a stacked hand. But this one is somewhat manageable. It's kind of tricky which one we're actually going to send back here. I think we actually want to send back the Witch, as that can search them out some other stuff. And we do have the Mystical Space Typhoons to deal with the Premature Burial and potentially the Scapegoat. So I do think that we have ways to deal around the other cards in their hand. So we are actually just going to send back this Witch here. And then main 2, I'm just going to set these Mystical Space Typhoons as well. The reason I do this is to deal with something like Premature Burial here. If they pre-map back like the Jinzo very early, then I want to have the Mystical Space Typhoon prepared for that. But honestly, I think I ultimately shouldn't have done that, because they do have a way to play around this double MST set here, as you may see. They're just going to set 1, and we are going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon in the end phase here, and this is mistake number 2, because I'm doing this in case they've got like a Scapegoat or something like that. But unfortunately, it's the MST that we did know about, so they can snipe our other MST, and now we're in a bit of a worse situation here. So I think if I had played that a little bit differently, we could have been in a much better spot. But as is, we are going to suffer a bit for that misplay. The Kaiku is pretty good. That will enable us to potentially banish that Jinzo eventually. But I think ultimately we want the Bazoo to deal with the Jinzo proactively if they do manage to bring it out, because it is likely that they'll potentially bring it out off the pre-mat, and we might not be able to stop that. So I do think that, saving the Bazoo in hand is a little bit better for us than saving the Kaiku. So we're going to go for a painful choice here, and we are going to send a good set of 5. It's a bit of a tricky one, given that we've already gone through some cards in our deck. And we've got 4 so far here. And our 5th will be the Gemini Elf here. I don't think they're going to give us any of these. They're just going to give us the Serpent, as that is the best pick here. But, I mean, we don't really want to draw the Gemini Elf. It's like a fine beater, but like Bazoo and Kaiku are a little bit better for us. The main reason we go for this painful, though, is just to have the Jinzo and Grave to pair with the Call of the Haunted. And these other cards we don't really care as much about. But they're probably just going to give us the Serpent, and they do indeed give us that Serpent there. So we are just going to switch the Tomato Defense, set the Serpent, and then set this Call of the Haunted and pass back to our opponent. They are going to just set one of their own, pass back to us. And Tomato is honestly pretty fine. We're going to bring out that Tomato and attack. And now that we can clear the entire board, we might as well do so. I mean, we could have cleared the entire board last turn as well, I guess. So actually, I guess I'm just doing this because they set an additional one. I want to clear that additional set here. But it looks like that's just a Magician of Faith. They're going to grab back a Mystical Space Typhoon. And that's fine if they use Mystical Space Typhoon proactively. then we can just call the Haunted back a Jinzo. So that's fine by us. We're going to hit in to their Momonga here. And I make what is likely another misplay this game. I'm very afraid of that pre-mat for the Jinzo here. So I actually do bring back a Kaiku here, which plays really badly into the MST. It also plays really badly into if our opponents got board removal. The call could have been a way to prevent them from actually being able to, OTK. But I go for the Kaiku play here, and I think this really is a mistake. They go for the Dark Hole here, and as I said, the Call of the Haunted really did play into the board removal there. So they will be able to get in for 14 after this. Set 1, pass back to us. That's honestly not bad. It means they haven't been able to set up the OTK yet. We're just going to set this Mystic Tomato here, potentially get a search off, and our opponent's going to bring out another Giant Rat. We're going to bring out a Witch off of that tomato, as we don't want to let our opponent crash into another tomato. And actually, yeah, that's all 3 tomatoes gone. So, we actually couldn't bring out another tomato if we wanted to. We draw Mirror Force, but we don't want to commit it to board just yet, because our opponent might have, like, an MST, which we do know that they do have. So, if they blind snipe the Mirror Force, that's obviously really bad for us. So we're going to save the Mirror Force in hand here for a time when we potentially have more spells and traps. We're going to hit into a Rat. They're going to bring out a Hayabusa, which makes me a little bit worried that they might be going for an OTK soon. Then they're going to switch everything sideways, and that's fine by us. We're going to switch this Witch to attack in to their monsters here, and it looks like they're not going to bring out anything off that. So we're just going to set this Serpent, set 2, pass back to our opponent. Now that we've got an additional back row, it makes the sort of MST a bit less good here. They're going to go for a Raigeki, though, so that will be very good. We luckily do get a search off the Witch, so we're going to grab another Bazoo. And they're just going to pass back to us, and I feel very good about that. We draw a Snatch Steal, which isn't the best right now, but we're going to go for a Bazoo and just start swinging in for big damage here. We're going to attack in for 2,500, and they're going to take it, so we feel good about that. Main 2, we're just going to pass back to them. We could potentially set the Snatch Steal as well, but they haven't used up a Harpies, so I feel like I don't want to play into that. And, yeah, so we just keep it in hand for in case they do have the Harpies Feather Duster. We draw a Reborn here, so we could potentially go for the Reborn. Just get super aggressive. They have used up both Dark Hole and Raigeki, so it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But instead, I just go for the Bazoo attack here. I think ultimately I should have gone for the Reborn, and actually probably should have gone for a Hayabusa here. Hayabusa is 2,000 damage each turn, and also if they do have the Scapegoat set, it does clear 2 tokens. So I think I should have gone for that. Just keep the aggressive pressure going a bit more because, again, they are out of Raigeki and Dark Hole. But I don't go for it. And now they set one which is extremely likely to be Scapegoat, as they haven't used up their previous set here at all yet. So we're going to go for a Reborn now. Bring back the Hayabusa now, which, again, I think likely was a mistake. We should have gone for this earlier. But let's see what they do here. We're going to attack in with the Hayabusa. And they're going to drop down to 500, so they better have Scapegoat now. It looks like they do. They're just saving that so that way they'd preserve the most goat tokens that they could on board. If we had brought out the Hayabusa a little bit earlier, then we could have potentially, gotten them to use this Scapegoat a lot earlier. And, yeah, and then they would have had less tokens on board. They go for a blind MST in the end phase here, and unfortunately they do hit the Mirror Force, so that is very rough for us, as that was our main way of stopping an OTK push here. They're going to Reborn this Hayabusa, and yeah, that's really unfortunate. They're going to equip it with Axe, summon out another Hayabusa, and if they've got United We Stand, yep, there's the United We Stand. So let's see what their last card in hand. Yeah, it's just a pre-mat. So if they hadn't actually been able to blind snipe the Mirror Force, then I think we would have been fine here. And maybe this is why we should have potentially set the Axe of Despair, just as another potential bait for spell and trap removal, because I really do think that, like, if we had been able to retain the Mirror Force, we would have won the game here, even through this Hayabusa OTK push here. And that is a major flaw of the deck because, you kind of got to go all in at some point on the OTK, and if your opponent doesn't have a way to stop it, then you're kind of out of luck. So, luckily for our opponent, they did correctly hit the right back row, and, yeah, so that will be the end of the game here. But I'm not really sure if that's a point in favor of the deck or a point against it, because that was kind of a desperate play. And luckily it worked out for them, but, half of the time it would not have. And we would have just easily won that game. So, I think we're kind of seeing some of the flaws with the Hayabusa deck here, which is a bit unfortunate because Hayabusa, of course, is a really cool idea for a strategy here. And, it's kind of dope that, it is possible to pull off occasionally, but it's just so fragile that I don't necessarily think it's the best in the long run. But, let's see how it does game 3. And if we or our opponent is able to pull it off, they're going to go for a Graceful, discarding a Serpent and Axe right away. Bring out a Sangan here, attack in for 1,000. And they're just going to set 2, pass back to us. And you might wonder, why we left our board open for this. And the reason is we want to save Bazoo for once we've got cards engraved for later. And Hayabusa, of course, we don't want to commit to board yet, given that we want to actually use that up. We're going to go for a Harpy's Feather Duster here. They've got an MST set. And so this, majorly backfires for us. So our opponent is going to be able to bring out the Scapegoat, bring out a bunch of tokens. And we're just going to set a Mystic Tomato, pass back to them. They're going to use Serpent to add that back to hand. And they're going to go for a Graceful Charity here. Drawing 3, discarding a Serpent, which is obviously very unfortunate. And they're just going to set 2, switch the Sangan, defense, pass back to us. And this is why we didn't go aggressive, because we have no reason to give them a monster card zone right now. We're going to set this Mage Power as a bluff. If they've got MST, it would likely eat that anyways. So I feel like this is fine. We draw Dark Hole, so that will be very good to go for, once we actually want to get in for damage. And we're just kind of biding our time. We don't really have any need to get aggressive here and open up some zones for them. So we're just waiting until we can potentially assemble an OTK. We're also going to bring out this Hayabusa Knight set. The only thing that really punishes this is if they've got Raigeki, because if they've got Dark Hole, they've got to clear their whole board. I mean, to be fair, they get to start off Sangan, so it might not honestly be the worst. But I feel like, it's fine just going for the Hayabusa set here to have it on board for when we do potentially want to go for a big push here. Also, we're at 7 cards. Unfortunately, they do have a Raigeki here, so they will be able to clear our board and hit in for 1,000 with the Sangan. We draw a Mystic Tomato, though, so we can just set that out, pass back to them. And I'm still feeling pretty good about this. They've got Jinzo, but ultimately that's fine. It makes our Dark Hole a lot better here. They're going to search out a Giant Rat with the Jinzo, attack in to our set Tomato, and we'll just get out of Sangan because, the entire board's getting wiped next turn with this Dark Hole. They're going to pass back to us, discarding a Giant Rat here at the end phase. And we're going to go for this Dark Hole, clearing the entire board, using the Sangan. And we actually are going to search out a Hayabusa because we can potentially go for a big lethal push here. We're going to Reborn, target that Jinzo, shutting off their trap cards here, and bring out this Hayabusa, equipping it with the Mage Power here, buffing it up to 2,500. And this will be lethal damage, I believe. No, it'll be slightly off. 7,400 damage this turn. But we've got the Change of Heart for next turn to potentially just win the game. So I feel very good about this. Yeah, so we're just going to go for the OTK push. Unfortunately, they do have Mystical Space Typhoon to get rid of the Mage Power. And yeah, that will be pretty bad for us. I mean, not the worst. We're still in a very commanding position on the board here. But, that's another point against this deck is that our opponent didn't even necessarily need something like Scapegoat. They could just have Mystical Space Typhoon instead. So, many, many different ways to disrupt the OTK here. And we're just running into all of them during this match, which makes sense given that we do have the mirror here. Opponent's going to go for a Change of Heart on the Jinzo, Reborn back a Hayabusa here. And they're going to get in for a ton of damage, it seems like. They're going to go for a pre-mat as well. I'm not necessarily sure they need to go this far in to get the OTK, but maybe they do. I mean, it can be very difficult to assemble the OTK. They're going to also summon out another Giant Rat here. And they've got an Active Despair on the Hayabusa. Seems like that's their only equip, which makes sense why they go for the OTK here. Jinzo into Hayabusa is 14. The 2 other rats is 14 plus 14, so 4,200 total. And then the Hayabusa will be 6,200 total, so it'll just make it to lethal damage, as long as we don't have a way to disrupt their combo. And unfortunately for them, we do. If we had an MST here, we would also be able to disrupt this combo. But luckily for us, we've got this Scapegoat here, which will do a very good job of disrupting it. They're going to hit into these tokens. They will be able to clear, I think, all of them if they so wish. And it looks like they are indeed going to do that. Honestly, maybe it might have been the play, just leave our zones locked. We get back the Jinzo at the end phase, but then we can't necessarily deal with this board that easily. So I think maybe they made a misplay here, just clearing our tokens. But we drew Raigeki either way, so it's likely would have been the end of the game. I mean, they would have had another turn because we wouldn't be able to kill them with just the Jinzo. So I do think that it was a mistake on their part to clear the tokens. But yeah, we're just gonna, as is, we're just gonna go for lethal and that will be the end of the game. And, I do think this is a major flaw with the OTK strategy is if your OTK is stopped, like you've invested so much that you don't necessarily have the options to commit to board to potentially stop what your opponent can do. And, I'm not saying necessarily our opponent would have had something to stop this if they hadn't gone all in, but it would have been a bit more likely. And it also might not have incentivized them to sort of like play out their entire power cards from hand this turn to just go for the OTK push into a very fragile sort of game state because, that scapegoat really, really did mess up their plans here. But, I do think that these games do show that, like, while the deck can potentially win some games with the OTK, it won with an OTK in game 2 of the second match. I do think the deck overall is not necessarily the best. I think probably tier 2. Like, that's where I'm going to put it for now. The Graceful does make the Hayabusa stuff a little bit more consistent, which is nice. But things like Scapegoat really do hurt the deck quite a bit. And because it can pull off its combo, sometimes I do think it's not like maybe rogue or trash, although maybe more testing will prove that it does fall into those categories. But just because it's so fragile and there's so many ways to disrupt it, I don't see it as a tier 1 deck. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. I always look forward to discussing these things with you, and there are a lot of different opinions on Hayabusa. I've only tested this deck out, in these games and seen some other games with it, and a lot of these flaws are coming from like a theoretical perspective, even though, the practical side of those flaws is being shown in these games. So people can definitely have differing opinions on this, and I could very well be wrong as more testing in this format continues. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.